Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Helena Wang, and I'm the Asia Senior Executive Editor of The Lancet and a member of the Fast Track team. I will start with an overview of the pathways to publication process at the Lancet Group, which we hope you will find useful and informative. We will then move to a panel discussion where I will be joined by 4 of my colleagues from across the Lancet Group. They will be sharing their expertise on areas we know are of interest to prospective authors, such as finding the right home for your research and preparing your manuscript prior to submission. We will then open the floor to your questions and are very much looking forward to answering as many as possible. You're welcome to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the webinar dashboard. And also on the dashboard, you will find a related resources box with links to helpful pages on the Lancet.com, which you will hear me reference throughout the session. If you wish to turn on closed caption on translations, please click the CC icon in the top right-hand corner of the webinar dashboard and select your preferred language from the options provided. Please note that captions and translations are just want to mention that the captions and translations are automatically generated and may not be entirely accurate. Once the webinar has concluded, you will receive a link via email to the on-demand version, which you can watch at your convenience. If you like, you can also share this link with your colleagues or others who may find this session of interest. We would be very grateful if you could complete our brief feedback survey, as this will enable us to improve our future webinar offerings. I would like to spend the next few minutes taking you through the pathways to publication in the diabetes at the Lancet Group. Whether you choose to submit your manuscript to the Lancet or one of our specialty discovery science or regional health journals, there are several pathways to publications for diabetes contents. Of course, individual Lancet journals can't publish every manuscript they receive. However, our editors can provide you with guidance to help you find the best home for your research via our article transfer service. This is where you may be offered the opportunity to transfer your manuscript within the Lancet Group or to another Elsevier journal as illustrated here. If you would like, you can explore our pathway illustration online by clicking on the Pathway to Publication link in the related resources box on the webinar dashboard. My editorial colleagues are all subject matter experts with medical or scientific background. Each manuscript submitted to a Lancet journal is treated individually, but most of the diabetes research manuscripts follow a similar path within the Lancet Group from submission through editorial to peer review as detailed in this slide. As subject matter experts, our editors carefully read every manuscript that is submitted and will decide the next appropriate step, whether that to be reject, advance, or recommend transfer. As part of our internal review process, which complements and expands upon external peer review, Lancet editors work closely with one another, regularly reviewing and commenting on manuscripts under consideration across the portfolio. When our editors decide to send manuscript for external peer review, they identify and invite external reviewers with relevant expertise from around the world, ensuring their complementary knowledge and skills provide an additional layer of rigorous scrutiny. Some articles are also sent to our statistical reviewer. These external experts make suggestions for improvements, critique the analysis, and provide recommendations to the author as well as our editors. Once the peer reviewers' comments are in hand, our editors again review internally and discuss the comments together, and the journal's editorial team then decide whether to take the manuscript forward towards publication. The editor-in-chief is the final arbitrator of all decisions on each of the Lancet journals. For example, the decision to take a paper to peer review, the decision to publish or reject in light of the peer reviewer's remarks, journal scope, and commissioning. Consideration of appeals, general inquiries, and editorial priorities at any given time. If your If your diabetes manuscript is rejected by the journal to which you first submitted, there may be an opportunity for it to be considered by another journal in the Lancet Group or a relevant elsewhere journal. Internal transfer can occur pre-peer review or post-peer review. Transfer to other journals only take place with the author's approval. If you agree to have your manuscript transferred to another journal, you will not need to reformat your manuscript, and within the Lancet Group, the original peer review comments are also transferred to help avoid additional delays or duplicate efforts amongst our esteemed peer reviewers. As a diabetes author, you may have many journal options within the Lancet Group, including the Lancet, which publish novel research that advances or illuminates medical science or practice, and the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology, which covers all diabetes research. We also have a range of specialty journals that provide coverage of diabetes contents relevant to their specific fields. These include, but are not limited to, the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, and the Lancet Primary Care, as well as the Lancet Oncology, the Lancet Obstetric, Gynecology and Women's Health, the Lancet Neurology, and the Lancet Psychiatry. The Lancet Gastroenterology and Hepatology, the Lancet Healthy Longevity, and the Lancet Medical Imaging and Thoracic. The Lancet Public Health, the Lancet Global Health, and the Lancet Digital Health all consider diabetes research focusing on the health of population within, as well as transcending specific geographic areas, and explore how technology can help improve healthcare delivery and promote better health and well-being globally. If you have diabetes content that focuses on a specific geographical region, please consider submitting to one of our original health titles. This open access journal publishes high-quality evidence-based research focused on 6 regions of the world as defined by WHO: Africa, the Americas, East Mediterranean, Europe, Southeast Asia, and the West Pacific. This journal reinforced the fact that interdependence and collaboration are fundamental to solving the problem that we face as a global society, which is especially important given recent events such as pandemics and other public health emergencies of international concern. If you work in translational or basic research, e-biomedicine may be a good fit for your manuscript, whereas e-clinical medicine publish emerging or early research in clinical medicine, including diabetes. So, as you can see, as a diabetes researcher, the Lancet Group offers as many as different options for publishing your manuscript, and our editors will work with you to find the best home for your paper. Should your manuscript progress with the Lancet Group, you will be supported by our collaborative international team of more than 200 scholarly publishing professionals, including expert editors, technological editors, publication editors, illustrators, proofreaders, marketing, communication, and multimedia specialists, publishers, and operation and product managers, and editorial assistants, all devoted to supporting you and your work to advance health worldwide. We are now moving to panel discussion, and I would like to introduce you to my colleagues who will be sharing insights and best practices to help you effectively publish your diabetes research. Please join me welcoming our panelists: Colin Davidson, Senior Editor and Diabetes Ambassador at The Lancet; Marta Koch, the Editor-in-Chief of The Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology; Shalini Garg, Editor-in-Chief of The Lancet Regional Health Southeast Asia; Claudia Schaefer, Editor-in-Chief of E-Clinical Medicine. Now, let me ask my colleague, Colin, the first question in the panel discussion. With such a broad range of journals that publish diabetes content, how should authors approach deciding where to submit their research? Over to you, Colin.
Thanks very much, Elena. Well, you already helped answer that question to some extent in your presentation there, but to give a bit more information. So I work for the Lancet. We call it the Weekly internally, but the sort of main Lancet, I suppose. And we, I think probably my main bit of advice from my perspective would be to not think so much about sort of disease area when you're deciding where to submit or which aspect of diabetes, and think more about the kind of implications of the advance that your paper represents, and importantly, kind of who it affects. So who's the appropriate audience for the paper you're submitting. So we get loads of papers at the Lancet that contain excellent research with robust methods and a clear story, but for some of those stories, it's just more obviously suitable for a specialist audience. So it might advance a question within the field, but the kind of broader general interest is lacking. So at the Lancet Weekly, we have an audience that's obviously international, generalist, as I mentioned. So we're looking for papers that change how we understand the burden, address major treatment gaps, or alter the kind of trajectory of diabetes globally. And sometimes that's about the size of the study, but that's not always the key thing. I'd say something we look for often, and Helena will know this as well, because she attends the same pre-review meetings that I do. These are meetings where we discuss papers that have just come in and decide if we're going to send them for external review. One of the main things we discuss is the potential of a manuscript to change clinical practice, policy, or thinking about a disease on a kind of larger scale. So that could be a decisive clinical trial. It could be an important meta-analysis that the field's been sort of crying out for, or it could be a kind of major public health or policy paper. So a good example, a couple of good examples from recent years would be 2024, we published Worldwide Trends in Diabetes Prevalence and Treatment from 1990 to 2022, which is from the Non-Communicable Disease Risk Factor Collaboration Group. And this was a population level global study, really immediate relevance to clinicians, policymakers, and kind of implications for broader health systems. So this is one that made purpose for the weekly. Similarly, we had diabetes from 1990 to 2021 and had projections to 2050. So that's racked up a huge number of citations. It frames diabetes as this kind of major global health challenge, and again, has clear implications for policy and prevention. So again, a really obvious one for the weekly, I feel. But that said, it's not all about the kind of size of the study. Not everyone can conduct these kind of massive global burden of disease style studies. And it's not only about trial phase either. It might seem externally like the weekly sort of would only be interested in these kind of decisive phase 3 trials that that lead to regulatory approval of drugs, but that's not the case at all. We totally appreciate that an earlier phase study can have interest, particularly if it demonstrates kind of significant novelty or has really obvious clinical relevance. So a good example of a phase 2 study we've published would be the retatrutide study, which I think was from 2024. It was phase 2. This was looking at retatrutide, the triple receptor agonists, so GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon. So it's a novel mechanism of action. And this study showed, clear efficacy in type 2 diabetes and led to the approval of a kind of phase 3 program. So that's, an example of a phase 2 study that made perfect sense for the weekly. And as a final point, I suppose, if even after visiting thelancet.com and familiarizing yourself with the scope of our different journals, consulting the information for authors documents that we all have on our websites, which give you a really good rundown of what we're looking for in a paper. If you're still uncertain about the best target venue, we're all friendly people and very open to pre-submission inquiries. So all of our email addresses are available online. As Helena mentioned, I'm the sort of diabetes person at the weekly, so I'm probably the best person to reach out to in the first instance. But yeah, you can just send us a kind of informal question, really, and we're always happy to sort of address those and help you decide where your research would best be targeted within the family. And as Helena mentioned as well, if you are ultimately unsuccessful with the first journal you try submitting to, we have this internal transfer service where we do our best to kind of make things efficient for you as authors, and we can offer you transfers to different journals without the paper needing to be sort of resubmitted and reviewed again. So hopefully that gives a bit of an overview.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Colin. Especially you use several publications as examples to guide our audiences. So my next question comes to Marta. How does collaboration between editors across different Lancet journals help ensure that diabetes research finds the right audience and journal home? Can you share an example when the collaborative approach really benefit an author's paper? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Helena. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something we get asked quite often. You already mentioned, our transfer system, which we call internally our cascade system. Callum gave a bit of flavor of how we collaborate, in manuscript meetings. So let me go a little bit more into that. So we obviously work in different Lancet journals, but we are actually in close contact with each other, and we collaborate a lot on assessing manuscripts, but also, in bigger projects. We meet in these manuscript meetings, and, you can imagine, a group of 20 editors in a manuscript papers, it always gets interesting. But the main goal really is to help authors find a good home for their paper. So this is where I feel our collective expertise is really important, trying to help authors find a good home for their paper. And especially for interdisciplinary work is really important to have different authors with different expertise. So just let me give you, an idea on how this works in practice, really. So say a paper is submitted to one of the journals, but for one reason or another, it doesn't quite make the cut there. And this could happen, either pre-peer review or after peer review. So imagine sometimes the reviewers will say, okay, this is interesting, but maybe the advance is not quite sufficient, or maybe is a facet, a different facet to this topic doesn't meet the bar for this specific journal. So basically, instead of sending straight away a rejection letter and asking the authors to start from scratch, we will have an internal conversation among ourselves and see if we can find a good home for that work. So, for instance, at the Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology, we have received excellent papers from the Lancet Weekly. Good examples are, secondary analysis of trials. They are still important. They are still, relevant for clinical practice, but could be seen as perhaps being more appropriate for a specialized audience, rather than for the general readership of the weekly. That is not to say they don't consider secondary analysis of trials, of course, but it is just to give you an example of papers we often receive. And we are always happy to consider these papers, and I should say we'll consider them together with the reviewers' comments if they have already been peer review, which basically saves a lot of time, for the authors, because we don't have to send their paper again to peer review. Also for reviewers, reviewers are very busy. So it's great that, we will accept the reviewers' comments and basically invite a revision based on those reviewers' comments. And this goes both ways. I gave you examples of papers we've received from the weekly that were great candidates for us, but often we will receive papers at the Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology that maybe not meet quite our bar, and maybe we'll feel they're more appropriate for other journals, for maybe our regional titles, eClinical Medicine. Sometimes we have papers that have a more global health focus that we are unable to consider. We'll discuss with our colleagues from Global Health and ask basically, what do you think of this paper? Would you be considering it for, for your journal? So I think that the really advantage of, submitting a paper to the Lancet, to a journal from the Lancet, is that your paper is not being evaluated just by one team, but is actually being seen by, by the whole family. And it basically, it maximizes the chances of finding a good home for your paper, instead of asking you to go back to square one. And, let me just add something. Actually, collaboration among editors is really fun. And these are really, great opportunities to learn more, from your colleagues as well. Yeah, I think that's about it.
I'm not sure if maybe we've lost Helena's audio there. We'll see if we can get that back. But thank you, Marta, for those great insights. In which case we will.
Callum. I was wondering what had happened.
Yes, no, I don't think that's just you. I
hope...
think we may have lost Helena temporarily there.
Okay.
So should we move on to the next question in that case?
Yeah.
So we've just had Marta talk us through the internal transfers process. Claudia, were you going to speak a little to how authors collaborate during the transfers process?
Yes, and not just during the transfer process. And I think Marta already phrased it very nicely. It is submitting to the Lancet is a big collaboration, not just between editors, but also between editors and, of course, the authors, because ultimately, you want to publish also with us. So I think there are various different levels of interactions between editors and the authors at various steps of a paper. Now this can already be, as we already heard, at pre-submission stage, where authors basically reach out to editors and consult about a study, if it fits the scope or it doesn't fit the scope. So we can directly give you feedback, already per email before you even start submitting your paper. So, and in that sense, we share pre-submission inquiries all the time across different journals, which is always beneficial also, for the authors as well, because then, we can directly find the best home even before submission. Yes, and then further on down the road, even after submission, there's often quite a lot of exchange between the editors and the authors, where, once an editor starts assessing the paper in more details, there might be some questions where, the editor maybe misunderstands, or maybe some information are missing from the paper. So there is close interaction where the editor might consult with the authors on questions like the registration or protocol, or maybe, more information about the ethical approval, so that these things can already be resolved before the paper might even go out to peer review. And then there's a lot of consultation and close communication between authors and the editor after peer review. Of course, once the paper is invited for revision, yes, then there can be a lot of exchange between editors and authors, where there will be discussions on how to resolve some of these reviewer comments, or even on what comments to prioritize in some ways. So what are the essential points for that specific journal? What needs to be answered? What might be a limitation? So, ultimately making the process more successful down the road. So that's why that communication is very important. Yes, and also close interaction with authors. If a paper is decided to be rejected, let's say at the Lancet, they peer reviewed it, but reviewers weren't so excited about it. But then, it might be offered to a different journal. So this is then, we heard a lot already about the transfer service in that way, where it is so beneficial, because what Marta said, the reviews can be transferred, all your files can be transferred just from one journal to the other. And of course, during that process, there is again a very close back and forth between editors and authors, again communicating what to prioritize during the revision process. So for our journal, Clinical Medicine, so we are a general medicine journal, so our scope is very broad, and so we are heavily involved in all these decision processes and all the discussion with editors from all the Lancet journals, and also with the authors ultimately. So this is something we do every day. It's beneficial for the journals and also for the authors, since good numbers of issues can already be clarified even before the paper is transferred or submitted. And so at the end of the day, it increases the chance for a positive outcome. And I think that's what we all want. That is good for editors and good for authors too.
That's great, Claudia. Nice positive note to finish on there. So the next question then, I'm going to direct this one to Shalini, first of all. What makes a manuscript stand out to you as an editor? Are there common strengths or mistakes that you see in diabetes submissions? So we'll go to Shalini first, and then we'll all give some answers to this one.
Yeah, thanks, Callum. Very important question for the researchers and authors who must be sitting in our audience. So for us, or for the Lancet Group, I think the manuscript stands out if it is answering a clinically relevant question with strong methods, clear reporting, meaningful contribution. But as a regional journal, you may know that Southeast Asia is now the epicenter of diabetes. So for us, the local or the regional evidence is very important. And we also look for, so that, you know, the treatment outcomes, access to care, risk factors, all these patterns, they differ highly from those reported in the high income settings. So contextualizing findings in the local health systems and populations, that's what we are looking at in the manuscript. So we recently published a manuscript which was pretty descriptive, but it filled a huge gap on multimorbidity in tribal populations in the country. So, and there is another manuscript which is highly contextual for this population that was about HbA1c as the marker for diabetes, and so it stirred quite a debate in the media. So these are kind of contextual, very contextual, local research that's you know, that's only important, which could be seen as you know, which could get lost in the global research platforms. Common mistakes, I would say, there is this good robust data, but then again you apply inadequate statistical analysis, which we see very commonly. And so for instance, researchers might apply a very complicated analysis to data that could have been presented in a descriptive manner, just trying to tell what are the trends, what are the patterns, because we are still looking for robust epidemiological data. And this could make a major contribution to the regional evidence. Then again, overstatement of conclusions. This is very common mistake that we see in our manuscripts. And then I would say poor alignment between the question, methods, and conclusions. So in the same way, causal conclusions are made which are not aligning with the findings. So I would say the authors sometimes underestimate the value of their own data, but I think well-conducted regional studies are extremely important because they will fill evidence gaps which global platforms might do.
That's great. Thanks, Shalini. I see Helena's back, but I will, being as we're on this question that we're all answering, I'll just add a few thoughts. So I would say appraising manuscripts of the weekly, one of the most important things is how well authors can articulate their clinical question and why it matters. So obviously, robust methodology, transparent reporting are really important, but strong framing can make all the difference for editors who have hundreds of papers arriving on their desk every week and not, you know, as much time as they would like to necessarily dig into the detail. If it can be made really clear straight off the bat why a finding matters to patient, clinicians, health systems, how it kind of advances existing knowledge, that's a really useful thing for an editor. So I did have a few examples of that. Perhaps in the interest of time, because we lost a little to the technical issues, I'll just mention something that we don't like to see so much at the weekly, which is interventional trials that haven't been prospectively registered. So this is obviously a much more technical thing, but it's absolutely essential. Basically, if you're conducting an interventional trial, you need to ensure it's registered ahead of the first patient's recruitment on a WHO approved registry. So here in the UK, that's clinicaltrials.gov is the sort of most commonly used one, but there's a whole list on WHO's website. And obviously registration matters because it helps to promote transparency in the way trials are conducted. It helps other researchers identify the need for a trial or whether it's already been conducted. It helps to make any kind of protocol amendments or changes since the original planning of the study. It makes those visible to the public. And it serves as a great public resource for patients and clinicians as well, who are just interested in staying abreast of trial development. So, as I say, prospective registration, and I think this applies across all the journals. It's kind of an absolute essential. In very rare circumstances, if there's a very, very good explanation as to why registration was retrospective, we will discuss that with the authors, but it has to be pretty compelling. And we've definitely rejected strong, interesting trials off the fact that they didn't have a good reason for retrospective registration. So don't make that mistake. As soon as you have a trial in mind, get it registered, would be my advice. And I don't know who wanted to add to that answer next.
Yeah, can I jump in if that's all right? Yeah, Callum, thanks for mentioning the importance, requirement of prospective trial registration. That's a big one for us as well. I wanted to make a quick point about guidelines and the importance of reporting work, research, clinical trials, systematic reviews, according to the appropriate guidelines, because it really is important for a number of reasons. Well, first, it really signals, quality, and that the authors did take the care, and they know what they are doing. But of course, it ensures that the paper is reported in a transparent way, and all elements are there for the readership to understand, basically, what has been done, what what methodology was used. It's also really helpful for reviewers when papers are reported, appropriately, and say, for a clinical trial, everything is consorted. And I think, even for authors, when they are writing their own papers, if they have that structure and they know, okay, we have to write a paper, according to these guidelines, it saves them time. So actually sort of almost provides a template for writing the paper. So yeah, so I just wanted to add that.
That's great. And I wondered, Claudia, did you have anything to add on that one, or have we covered everything?
Basically, just for me, I would probably say that just a clear rationale, in the cover letter and in the summary and research and context section that, we all journal require, can help, directly screening your paper.
Great, thanks very much. So I think we covered that one fairly comprehensively. The next question is one that I'm going to have to direct to myself in the first instance, but then pass over to my colleague Marta. So if an author is planning to present their research at a conference, how can the Lancet Group support them? And I have a very easy answer here from the perspective of the Lancet Weekly. We have our Fast Track program, which is only for specific manuscripts, sort of selected papers. Usually these are sort of, randomized control trials, often phase 3 trials, which are judged eligible based on the fact that they're going to be presented at a conference, and that conference is, relatively soon. Or it might be that there's a regulatory decision coming up or a policy decision, and you think that the evidence is absolutely essential to be put out there in the public domain before that decision is taken. If accepted, these can be published as quickly as 4 weeks after submission. So that's the kind of bare minimum we can do fast track on, and it does need a strong rationale for that timeline. In an ideal world, I would say for everyone's sanity, both editors and authors and reviewers, you would submit ahead of that. So as soon as you know that you have a paper accepted for a conference, if you can let us know, even via a pre-submission inquiry. So quite often I work with authors who have something accepted at ADA, and they know about this maybe 3 months in advance, and they'll send through the protocol and the SAP and the kind of top line results, but they still haven't had time to go through the sort of data and really refine the manuscript itself. But at that stage, if we know it's coming, the fast track team can sort of make an assessment as to whether that's likely to be appropriate for fast track. So yeah, these papers still undergo rigorous peer review, but we can do things on a really quite expedited timeline. And there's loads of great examples. If anyone's attending ADA in New Orleans next month, you'll see plenty of papers that were published in the Lancet and which have been considered under our fast track program. And I'll pass now to Marta to add to that answer.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Callum, but, perhaps I will reiterate that, timing publication of our content with conferences really is an opportunity to maximize the visibility of the work. And we really enjoy doing that. We're always happy when our, papers, catch media attention and generate buzz. And, it's good for authors also when they have their paper published, when they are presenting their work and they can say, oh, hang on, it's, go and check the website, here's the paper. It sort of really gives that indication that the data is robust, it has been peer reviewed and it's sort of, it's been, vetted. And I think, for the attendees of the conference, it really enriches their experience as well. They are sitting in the lecture hall and they can just, go and check the paper and read it. So I think these are really, really good opportunities for, enhancing the impact of the work. And this is always something that, we are keen to do and to help with when we can. Yeah, I think that sort of covers it. Thanks, Callum.
Thanks very much. That's great. So that sort of concludes the panel discussion component. Now, obviously, we have a kind of Q&A we have plenty of audience questions coming in that I can see. There were just a couple of additional questions that we've had submitted. I wanted to direct this first one to Shalini. So, and I think you've actually already addressed this to some extent, but regional context is obviously crucial to diabetes research. So how do the Lancet regional health journals specifically provide a platform for research that might be underrepresented in the global literature?
Yeah, thanks, Callum. Yeah, regional health journals are very important, and because that much of the global literature still comes from a limited number of countries and settings. And so the regional health suite of journals helps address this gap by providing a dedicated platform for research that reflects local populations, their health systems, their realities. And an important aspect is that not only the data, but also the voices that shape the research. So when we look at submissions, we also look at the authorship. And is the research being led by the authors from the region, or are these authors from other settings? Because these investigators will bring their own understanding and they are best positioned to interpret those findings. The regional health journals also, allow research that may have been previously considered too local or, for broader journals, and it might not have gained visibility and impact. But these studies are very relevant for policymakers and countries that may be facing similar challenges. So this is important, particularly in diabetes, where social determinants, transitions, or demographic, nutrition transitions, urbanization, healthcare access, they differ so markedly across the world. So I think that's why it's very important to have these the regional health journals in place.
That's great. Thank you very much, Shalini. So another question I can see in the chat then. How do the journals and the Lancet Group's authors benefit from editors with different scientific and regional expertise? Yeah, as I think Claudia, or maybe it was Marta already mentioned, you have people from all sorts of different disciplines and backgrounds looking at your papers. Maybe I could throw this one to Claudia as to how that sort of benefits authors then.
Yes. And it's a great follow-up question from Shalini's introduction. So, our journal, again, is general medicine journal. So we receive all various content from all different journals, from all different regions of the world. And these are all relevant to us in some ways. And, especially for these regional papers, they always have a regional context. So for us, certainly, this is sometimes difficult to judge. So to have a wide group of expertise from various different areas from the world is very important for us, who have that background and who have that knowledge. So we rely strongly on editors from various backgrounds within our team, but also within the whole Lancet Group, but also from our reviewers in that way, who have that regional expertise and who can help us understand what are the actual issues in that specific region. So in that way, we highly depend on that from our experience. For our journal, we are at the moment 7 editors. We're going to be 9 soon. And we have various types of backgrounds in our editorial team, which is already great and helps us. And I think it makes a journal better because at the end of the day, various opinions come together. And, I think that can always just help the journal. And and I think, Shalini, you probably can add a little bit to that too.
No, thanks, Claudia. I think you have covered this pretty much. So again, yes, so diversity of editorial expertise from across regions and disciplines does, help us, and it ensures that, the manuscripts are evaluated not only for the scientific rigor, but the contextual relevance and practical implications. So this is, it strengthens the papers and builds a more inclusive evidence base. So as Claudia said, she has editors from different backgrounds. So similarly, I have editors from different backgrounds as well, and it strengthens our review process.
Thanks very much, both of you. That's great. So there's quite a quick one to just quickly address in the chat here. Does the Lancet charge article processing charges? So we have both hybrid journals at the Lancet in the Lancet family, and we have Gold Open Access journals, and you have good representation from both on this call. So Marta and I, our journals are hybrid, while Shalini and Claudia, they're Gold Open Access. If you're submitting to a hybrid journal, you basically will not be charged an APC unless you have a funder who requires open access publication and with whom we have an agreement, in which case we have both gold and subscription green open access solutions. And obviously for the open access journals, all papers there are published as open access. And rather than list all of our APCs, I will direct you to thelancet.com/open access, where you can find all of those in a handy table. Next question I'm going to ask to Claudia, if that's okay. So my paper in the diabetes field was rejected after peer review by one of the Lancet journals. Can I revise the paper based on the comments received from reviewers and submit to another Lancet journal?
Yes, great question. And, I think this emphasizes again what we're trying to convey to you guys already for the last 45 minutes. If this is the case and you feel all the comments can be answered, I think, reach out to us. I mean, you can reach out to the editor of that journal who rejected your journal and ask, well, what do you think? Can I resubmit this maybe to a different journal? Or if you already have a journal in mind, then contact that editor-in-chief or the deputy editor and ask about it. Share the manuscript numbers so that editor can directly look at your paper, can directly look at the comments and also the editorial comments. And there might be a chance it was already discussed between editors. So we can all give you feedback on that then. So reach out.
Thanks very much, Claudia. We have a question here. What about qualitative research? So I can speak briefly to this one from the weekly perspective. We obviously don't have any kind of disbarring kind of requirements around research. I would say the majority of what we publish in the Lancet isn't qualitative research. There might be a qualitative component to a paper that has quantitative analyses in it, and that could be a nice sort of additional part if you want to explore something that's far more sort of conducive to qualitative research. It's not something that would stop us considering a paper, but I would say purely qualitative research in the Lancet Weekly is very uncommon. In fact, in the time I've been here, I don't think we've ever published a dedicated sort of qualitative research article. So, but I don't know if any other journals, if any other editors want to speak to that one from their perspective.
Yeah, I can quickly jump in. I mean, we do publish a lot on that. I mean, we just recently had a big collaboration with the Lancet Oncology and Lancet Child, just on how to do clinical research with qualitative methods. Our paper was specifically on children, so a huge collaboration also with St. Jude, who put forward some recommendation and a framework how to do that. So yes, we do that.
Great, thanks very much. A question here, do any of the Lancet journals publish patient-authored perspectives? Marta, could I throw this one to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's the short answer. Yes, we do. And, I'd say that it is really a collective interest from the Lancet family to offer a platform for the patient voice, because we feel is absolutely critical to hear from them. So if you are a patient or you have a certain lived experience and you'd like to write a short piece, do by all means reach out to the journal you'd like to submit to and ask them whether they are interested. Many journals do publish often patients' perspectives. For the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology, we do have a specific format, is a one-page called Reflections. We haven't published a lot of them, but it's not because of lack of interest, is because we don't get them very often. So by all means, do reach out and submit them, because we are interested and we feel is really, really important to offer that, patient voice and promote it.
That's really interesting to hear that, that you don't receive a huge number of submissions. Maybe this is a good opportunity to get the word out that we do, because I would say the same for the weekly. We have a dedicated sort of team that handles what we call the sort of light blue section in the Lancet, where we do publish likewise patient perspectives. And so get the word out. We're interested in considering, and people should get in touch. We have a question here. If my paper looks into two conditions, let's say diabetes and hypertension, can it still fit in Lancet Diabetes? It says Lancet DM. I assume this is Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology. So Marta, would you consider a paper that maybe has a bit of a blend of diabetes and cardiovascular science in there, for example?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In fact, a large, majority of papers really, is covering different conditions. And of course, nowadays we're really interesting to learn more about, comorbidities. This has become a really, really hot topic. So, absolutely. Please reach out if you feel it has, potential for impacting clinical practice or policy guidelines, or, it's a large epidemiological study. Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. I'm going to jump to this very interesting question here, a little further down in the chat. For studies that focus on the immunopathology of type 1 diabetes with in vitro studies validation, would you recommend a submission to the Lancet or a more experimental journal? If yes to the Lancet, which of the journals will be appropriate? And I'm going to pass this one to Claudia, if that's okay.
Yes, no, thank you. I think I would be cautious a little bit on saying yes, this could be a fit within the Lancet. E-clinical medicine is part of the Lancet Discovery Science, and so we do have a sister journal, which is called e-biomedicine. And, as the title says, it's really more biomedical research. So again, without knowing more, that could benefit that scope for e-biomedicine. But in any way, just reach out to the editor-in-chief. Her name is Julie. You can find her email on the website. And if you have already a draft of the manuscript, attach it per email. They're probably happy to have a look.
That's great. Thanks, Claudia. Another one that can probably be dealt with fairly quickly here. Do you accept preprints, and if yes, from which servers? So when you submit your paper to the Lancet, you will be given the option to publish as a preprint. It's handled by a specific editor here at the Lancet Weekly, so I can't speak too much to the details of the process, but we have a collaboration with SSRN, which is a preliminary research sharing platform. So the short answer is yes, essentially. I don't know if any other editors want to jump in on that in case I've missed nuance relevant to your journals. No? In which case, we'll move on to the question that's on everyone's lips, AI. So have you integrated AI into your assessment process? And if yes, has its integration affected your view of a paper's quality, increasing authors' burden of proof? Well, AI is definitely a hot topic, and I would say that the situation at the Weekly, at least, and I think across the group, is that we're all learning the whole time, and our processes are evolving as the technology evolves very rapidly. The key thing for the Weekly right now, I would say, is that we want transparent declaration of how AI was used. So when a paper is any AI use, and I know increasingly now there has been in a lot of research. Very transparent. If you're submitting a research article and you've used, any kind of AI tool, and that can be generative AI, large language models, or it could be maybe some kind of machine learning tech that's been around a little longer, it's just great to be upfront when you ask that question on submission, how exactly you've used it, because this helps an editor assess to what extent the AI was used for what we consider something that should have human oversight versus, something like grammar and punctuation improvement, where it's very reasonable to have used AI to help with that. I'm sure some of the other editors on the call might want to add to that answer. Does anyone have any specific thoughts on how AI use affected the way they appraise manuscripts? Anything that's made it more challenging for editors?
I mean, maybe not more challenging, maybe more comprehensive, I would say. As you said, you're having all these tools. So now we can look at various aspects and, discover some more for other issues. But they're also helpful. For example, what we use it for, just for internally, sometimes that we run authors' names and look if the declaration of interest are correct, because that's an important point, especially with trials, and so AI tools can nicely help with that. It made it comprehensive when it can with the second eye.
Definitely, yes. Plenty of ways AI can be helpful for editors as well as for authors, I would agree. We have a question here. There's been growing interest in social prescribing as an approach to diabetes management, which is an interdisciplinary field bridging medicine and social science. Would the Lancet consider manuscripts exploring this intersection? So I'm fairly certain that the Lancet Weekly, at least, has published an editorial in the last 6 months on social prescribing. So I would definitely say that interdisciplinary fields, particularly for a journal like mine, the Lancet Weekly, we're obviously looking for papers that have general interest. So if you're bringing together multiple fields in one study, that's a strength, if anything. Obviously, it depends on lots of other factors, whether your specific manuscript would be one for consideration. But the short answer is yes, we would be interested in manuscripts exploring this. Any comments from other editors on the call?
I think the regional Western Pacific also published extensively on social prescribing in their journal. And yes, we do. And yes, as Callum said, short answer is yes, we are looking at interactions between social sciences and medicine. That's very important for, reaching our goals, collective goals. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Shalini. I've just seen we have a question in the chat here directed to Claudia. How can we reach out to specific editors ahead of submission of a manuscript? And then a question to me, how can we get help for statistical analysis in the case of a clinical trial. So Claudia, I'll let you address the first part.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. So you can all find our email addresses on the websites. They're all listed. If you scroll all the way down, then you can see the teams, and then everybody has a little picture and a description. So there's then the email. Yeah, just shoot us an email.
That's great. Thanks very much. Yeah, your part to me is a little trickier, I suppose. So obviously, as Lancet editors, we can't really offer a huge amount of advice prior to submission. That's down to the sort of trial statistician. We do send everything for rigorous peer review by a statistician at the Lancet, and in the case of trials, we have dedicated specialists who are really familiar with trial methodology, so they will be able to sort of strengthen the robustness of any analyses post-submission. Prior to submission, editors may be less able to help, apart from directing you to the various resources already available in the literature to sort of assist with trial methodology. You can find loads of good stuff. There's a great course that I think Imperial College run, which I've certainly attended as an editor in training, and they offer great feedback on trial methodology. So there's lots of resources out there to assist you with that. We have a question here, which I'm going to again send to Claudia. We have a manuscript which, oh, sorry, the chat's just updated and the question's leapt somewhere else. Bear with me. Okay, we have a manuscript we think might match e-clinical medicine or regional health scopes and could be sent for review, but we want to try another journal within the Lancet family, for example, Lancet Diabetes, which has a higher, I assume this refers to sort of impact factor, so a higher impact factor. Does the higher impact factor journals have a higher standards and therefore might not be sent for review? What's the strategy for helping choose a matched journal? So, I mean, this refers to all of you in the question, really. So I'll start with Claudia, maybe.
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think Marta can probably talk a little bit to that, because basically, when a paper gets submitted to her journal, which obviously, is a higher impact journal, then she can make the decision, if it is for her or for her journal, or rather for a different journal. I mean, you're asking about higher standards. I mean, there might be different standards, and I mean, we also need to consider the amount that some journals are able to publish. So there is not always space. So of course, if they have a lot of great studies, then there is limited space. So it might just not be a standard, but it might just be but yeah, I mean, some things might be okay for us, which, might then for Marta, not really up to the standard for her journal. I think your strategy should be, to go for your priority journal first, and, then see how it goes. I mean, that would be my strategy. But I don't know, Marta, maybe you want to talk more about standards.
No, I think that's good advice, Claudia. I mean, that's what I would do as an author as well. But, I would also say, mention that in the cover letter and say, look, we're sending this paper to, say, the Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology, however, if it doesn't make it there, we'd also be interested in having it considered at clinical medicine, and explain that in the cover, in the letter to the editor. And in fact, I'll just add that cover letter is really, really a good opportunity, to tell editors some things that you may not be able to explain in the manuscript. So, use it to your advantage.
That's great. Thank you very, very much. We're coming up to the hour. There is one last question here that I thought would be really useful to try and get an answer in for before we wrap up. And I'm going to put this one to Shalini. So what common types of weaknesses do editors or reviewers identify in diabetes-related manuscripts submitted by early career researchers from low or middle-income countries? Shalini, would you be able to speak to that one?
Yeah, Callum, this is a very important question, and I think we all have addressed this in our panel. And so look for methods and start with the design, the study design. When you're starting, think about the publication right then. And we have plenty of resources to guide you through these research designs and how to write a paper and what are the things that we look for. we have plenty of resources on our website to guide you. So look for common, and do register your trial before starting the actual trial, before recruiting the patients or participants. So don't start just like that. Use your resources, become aware of the journal that you're going to submit your research to. What are their priorities? What do they look for in their research? What kind of papers have they published recently? And look for the audience. What is your audience? Is it a specialty audience, or are you looking for general readership? Are they going to be public health professionals, program managers, policymakers? So first find out the audience that you're looking for, and then draft your paper in a way that sends a message that's useful for them. So that's please, and you can also watch this webinar again on demand. So I would recommend that you watch all our recommendations on the weaknesses of papers and strengths of papers that we look for. In interest of time, I'll stop here.
Great, thanks very much, Shalini. Yeah, we've had loads of excellent questions. We're 1 minute after the hour. Thanks to my expert colleagues for sharing their knowledge, and to all of you for joining the webinar today. Hope you found it useful, and we've been able to provide you with some greater insights into the various pathways to publication in diabetes here at the Lancet. If you do still have questions, I hope we've made it clear already, but you're always welcome to contact us. If you go to thelancet.com/contact us, you can find all the various details you'll need for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.